By now, just about everybody has seen Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and from what I've seen of the reviews, it's not really doing well. It would be hyperbolic to say that it was a complete disaster, as some of the reviews have been positive, but overwhelmingly, most of the reviews I've seen have been pretty negative, especially compared to Episode 7, which got outstanding reviews. People have gone so far as to even say that this movie managed to destroy the entire Star Wars legacy. Well, I think that's a bit ridiculous. Saying things like that really doesn't hold up anymore, especially considering how bad the prequels were. I remember everyone crying that Star Wars was dead after Phantom Menace came out. But here we are now, over 17 years later, and the series is just as popular as it's ever been. In fact, you can't really go anywhere without seeing tons of Star Wars merchandise, cartoons, and other paraphernalia being thrown at you constantly. Now I'll say this for the record, I did not like The Last Jedi. I thought the plot was convoluted, I thought the characters were boring, I thought that they really messed up Luke Skywalker's character, and if any of the characters had been capable of using even the slightest bit of common sense, most of the conflicts in the film could have been easily avoided. But there are enough reviews of The Last Jedi out there already, and the film has been dissected dozens of times by now, so I won't bother going into too much detail regarding the various problems I had with the film. Instead, I'll be discussing a question that few people seem to be asking. While fans seem to be continuously demanding more and more Star Wars-related content, has anyone really stopped to ask whether anything outside the original trilogy is even necessary? Is the story of Star Wars and the universe it takes place in actually large enough to encompass a never-ending barrage of new installments? To answer this question, we first have to examine exactly what kind of story Star Wars really is.
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice.
At its core, Star Wars is the archetypal hero's journey, set in space. Luke Skywalker is an ordinary young man who learns that he has a great destiny far outside the small little desert planet that he's grown up on. After leaving his home, Luke embarks on a journey of trials and tribulations, meeting new friends and allies, making new enemies, and receiving training from wise old Jedi from the past, both living and non-living. Luke's interactions with the spirits of the departed Jedi, such as Obi-Wan Kenobi, symbolize the wisdom and lessons of the past. In this way, the stories and legends of great heroes never truly dies. Luke is able to learn from both past successes and failures of those who came before him, and ultimately grow as a person. Later on, we learn that Darth Vader, who embodies the evil that Luke vows to destroy, is actually his father. This gives the face of evil a more human element and forces Luke to not only confront the evil of the Empire he hopes to destroy, but to confront the darkness within himself. In the end, through hardship, training, and the help of his allies, Luke is able to overcome the darkness within him and ultimately redeem his father and destroy the Empire, saving the entire universe and claiming his place in history as a legend amongst the many that came before him. And that's it. The story's complete, the evil empire is destroyed, and everyone gets to live in peace as far as we know. It doesn't really matter what happened before the events of the film or really what happens after. What's important is that a hero's journey is complete and we got to see the entire story told from beginning to end. As I mentioned before, the prequels were hated by almost everybody, and for good reason. But really, even if they had been good, what would they have added to the overall story? Does it really matter what Anakin Skywalker was like before he became Darth Vader? Does it affect the story to see exactly how the Republic became an empire in the first place? And does seeing more lightsaber fights really add or detract to the ones we've seen in this film? While some diehard fans may be interested to know, it all just really amounts to trivia in the end and has no significant impact on the hero's journey, the journey from the unlikely hero to the legend that saves the universe. This isn't to say that seeing the past wouldn't have been interesting, but overall, it doesn't really have any impact on this particular story. Hell, pretty much anything could have happened, and the events that we saw in the prequels could have happened in just about any universe. In fact, change a few names and change the name of the Force, and you've got a completely different movie that takes place in an entirely different universe. And I think this touches on fundamentally why Star Wars is so special. The Star Wars universe is obviously vast, but we only get to see so much of it. We see few planets, and we really don't get to see a huge portion of the history of what went on. And that's because it just really isn't that important. The other planets don't matter in this, they're just superfluous. We see one single conflict, one battle of good and evil, during a particular time period. Star Wars carries on a legacy of stories that have been told for centuries, and stories that we truly love. It's seeing a hero rise to an occasion and become great. It's what legends are made of. And inside, I think we all really desire those kind of stories. They teach us lessons and entertain us. In the end, we learn a lot from fairy tales and fables that simply learning history just can't teach us. It's stuff that sticks with us and shapes who we are as individuals and as a culture. And there's a certain brilliance to the phrase at the beginning of every Star Wars film, "A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." At first, this seems really weird considering the fact that it takes place in space and the technology seems way more than anything we have the ability to produce or may ever have the ability to produce. But when one stops to think about this phrase, you realize that the time and place that this conflict occurs really isn't important, whether it's in the past, the present, the future, or any galaxy that we'll ever see. It shows that the same kind of stories are told throughout mankind's history and will always be told. It carries on a legacy that's greater than humanity itself and in a way really defines us. We'll always seek out legends and heroes, and we'll always look for the bravery of those who came before us as guidance of how to live our own lives. Some of the inspirations for Star Wars were old samurai films that George Lucas was inspired by, as well as westerns. Films that placed the protagonist in a situation where it was up to him whether he would run away and preserve himself for another day, or to pick up the sword or gun and fight for what he believes in. Now we get to the future Star Wars installments, of which we've so far have The Force Awakens, Episode 7, and The Last Jedi, Episode 8. As I said about the prequels, I really don't understand what these films could have possibly added to the overall Star Wars story. Knowing what happens in the future doesn't add any more than knowing what happened in the past did. It doesn't stop the fact that the original trilogy took place in a single conflict between the protagonist of that particular story. It just kind of continues things on inevitably. So from the way I look at it, there were only a few ways that this could have possibly gone. Either it takes place in the very distant future where the protagonists are long since dead, or it takes place not so long afterwards and the protagonists are in the film but kind of pushed to the background. And it seems like we've gotten the latter of the two. Either possibility was doomed to disappoint some fans and really fail to live up to anybody's expectations. One of the biggest complaints against The Force Awakens was the fact that it's virtually the same story as Episode 4, A New Hope, and combined a little bit with The Empire Strikes Back. And while it's not completely accurate, I can definitely see where people are coming from with that. You've got a character from somewhere in the universe who finds out she has a great destiny and goes off and meets a bunch of random characters and goes to fulfill this destiny. However, unlike the original trilogy, there really is no growth or character development for Rey, the protagonist of this trilogy. Unlike with Luke Skywalker, she starts off great at everything and just continues to be great at everything. She immediately impresses everybody, including Han Solo and Princess Leia, and becomes a vital part of the Resistance, which is just the same conflict as in the original, except now instead of calling it the Empire, they're calling it the First Order. So they really have just rehashed the same plot that we already saw. What's the point of this? Well, part of this can easily be contributed to the fact that it was poorly written. It's also probably due to the fact that the creators didn't want to repeat the same story by reshowing the hero's story from the original trilogy. I'm sure playing it safe was also a bit of a factor in this as well. So in The Last Jedi, Rey meets Luke Skywalker and asks him to train her, but he's all mad because he failed one of his students and is now living as a hermit on some remote planet. which has the origin of the Jedi or some shit like that. Doesn't really matter. Either way, he's abandoned everybody for reasons that don't make any sense. This isn't the same character that decided to fight the Empire and never gave up on on the good inside his father. This is a guy who made a mistake and decided that he was just going to isolate himself, leaving his sister to fight the rebellion all on her own. It kind of ruins his character overall. I mean, is this really the same guy we saw in the previous films? It's obvious that this is manufactured conflict that makes very little sense and is just there to have Luke do something, because who doesn't love Luke Skywalker and the other characters? In fact, when you really listen to a lot of their dialogue, especially in Force Awakens amongst Han Solo and Princess Leia, most of their lines are just saying how cool the new characters of Rey and Finn and Poe and God knows who else are, giving them a thumbs up so that you know that you're supposed to like them, because the other ones do. So why wouldn't you, right? Overall, nothing's really being added by this new trilogy. It's just kind of expanding a universe that was never meant to be expanded upon. There's a difference between the Star Wars universe and the Star Trek universe. Star Trek has a universe that goes on forever. It can be traveled for centuries, and you'll still find new worlds. At its core, Star Trek is the story of mankind, traveling to new worlds and finding new places amongst the stars. It's about the passion of adventure that's challenged and led mankind to travel the globe and even to travel into space. Now contrast this with Star Wars, which is really just the story of a single conflict that takes place in one part of the galaxy. There's an insurmountable difference between the scales of the two universes, and quite frankly, one leads to a universe that can go on forever, and one that just kind of has to end after a while. I understand that a lot of people really love Star Wars and love a lot of the parts that go past the original trilogy, and I can't fault anybody for that. If you enjoy it, that's great. More power to you. But overall, I just don't really feel like the story needs to be told any further. But with all these new installments and this universe being increased far past its breaking point, aren't we just ruining something that we loved? Isn't it time to just say goodbye and move on to something else? That's not saying that we should ever forget Star Wars or the joy that it brought us when we were kids, but to move on to new stories and to tell new legends. This one is, at least for me, done. I'll be honest, I'll probably go see episode 9 when it comes out. I've seen all of them so far, and why stop now? But overall, I think it's just time for us to have a discussion of when to let go of a story. When's the proper time to say goodbye to characters we actually really care about? Should we really keep trying to sustain this story on for an indefinite amount of time? Or is it just time to pull the plug, say goodbye, and remember the good times? Some of my earliest memories are of watching the original trilogy, playing with the different action figures and having fake lightsaber fights. And I'll always have those memories. They'll never go away. But at the same point, they are memories, and we have to move on at some point. You can continue to enjoy Star Wars. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you want more of it, that's fine. But if you really love something, maybe it's just time to let it go. Maybe we should stop letting nostalgia take the best of us and just write our own stories. Live on in the legacy of Star Wars through new stories, new galaxies, an entirely new universe. Maybe it's time for Star Wars to become like the old samurai and Western films that inspired it in the first place. Personally, I'd like for Star Wars to remain a great story that I'll always remember, rather than just a cash cow for a huge corporation. One that doesn't really care about artistic integrity, but really only cares about making money. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Should Star Wars have ended after the Return of the Jedi, or should it just keep going? You guys decide. Let me know what you think, and thank you for watching.